part 2 of UFO disclosure, reptilians, and the Antichrist. So I leaned rather heavily on the British royal family and Prince Charles, now King Charles, when it comes to the reptilian theory or hypothesis held by a number of people. Obviously, the best known of those being David Icke. For years, people had laughed at him, but maybe it is time we stop laughing, because he may not be entirely wrong. Please, don't stop reading if you're reading, or stop listening if you are listening. It is my opinion that David Icke's only problem is that he is missing a plausible explanation, one which can be scientifically or historically explained, and that is what I am going to try and do. When one looks into the word reptilians as it relates to what we perceive as human, the alien concept or narrative shifts to a very prominent modern, well, somewhat modern theory. Some would even say conspiracy theory. To be clear, when we talk about reptilian humans, we are not talking about spaceships, but more about global control, hidden bloodlines, and institutional power. In this framework, the reptilian law or theory is interpreted in two ways. Firstly, the literal hybrid view. And this is then the view or premise of the likes of David Icke. This hypothesis or theory claims that ancient non-human lineages interbred with humans, particularly those with leadership qualities or in leadership positions. This resulted in hybrid bloodlines who retained power throughout the centuries, like the British royal family. And obviously they retained power through non-democratic passing of power along the bloodline, instead of, say, through a majority vote. In other words, exactly like the British royal family's line of succession. Secondly, we have the allegorical or symbolic point of view. This is where the term reptilian is seen as a dark metaphor. It represents a ruthless, cold, and calculated ruling class which lacks empathy, operates entirely out of primal survivalist reptilian brain, and views the general population as a resource to be used and managed. Unlike standard UFO lore, the secret elite narrative focuses on genealogy and institutional captured states. Now, what does this mean in normal English? Simply this: the British royal family, along with other European royal houses, are often placed in the center of these theories because of their guarded bloodline, their immense ancestral wealth, and centuries of institutional permanence. These bloodlines are then also linked to things like international banking systems, secret societies, global organizations, and the theory, and sometimes more than a theory, but obvious truth. However, it is alleged and sometimes even proven that these elite bloodlines orchestrate certain major events, like political changes and economic shifts. So let's take a break and let's evaluate. The guarded bloodlines, the ancestral wealth, and the institutional permanence of the royal family is a given. Okay, there's no argument about that. But it is when it comes to the organizations and affiliations of members of the royal family that it starts to really make sense why this reptilian law is indeed attributed to them. Charles, for instance, having been a huge proponent of the WEF, the Duke of Kent and Prince Michael both being known Freemasons. Many of these ceremonies held by and attended by the members of the royal family are just plain weird. One which comes to mind being the Order of the Garter ceremony, and many of these ceremonies still have like uniformed, dressed up little pages carrying the robes. All in all, it is truly taking on a slight ominous feel and look in today's day and age. Then there is the psychology behind the royal family or elite reptilians. We are often faced with things and situations we just cannot explain. Corruption, wars, economic inequality. How can humans do this to other humans? Surely those leaders, those elites, cannot possibly be human. It is easier to accept that these people are non-human rather than accept that they are naturally indifferent. So often when a population feels totally disconnected from the elites or their royal families or their leaders, and when people feel oppressed, they often depict their rulers as monstrous. For example, vampires, or then the non-human entities like reptilians. It is fascinating how ancient mythology, genealogy, and deep distrust of political institutions and even the media merge into one single theory or one single hypothesis or even one single myth. But if only it ended there. But there are so many historical myths and stories which plays right into this reptilian hypothesis. The early medieval Frankish family claimed that their lineage began when the queen was impregnated by a sea beast, the Quinotaur. The Emperor of China reckons that his direct lineage is from dragons, and the pharaohs of Egypt wore the upright cobra on their crowns, and in Greek mythology, the foundational king of Athens, Cecrops, was depicted as a man with a serpent's tail. And don't you know it, there is indeed a literal secret society group of elites bound by a reptilian symbol called Societas Draconistarum, or the Order of the Dragon. Its most famous historical member was Vlad II of Wallachia, who took the name Dracul, which literally means dragon or devil. And then he passed the title on to his son, Vlad III Dracula. And the rest is history. And then lastly, there is what we call a metaphor, but which, when you go right back, isn't really a metaphor. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the metaphor of blue blood, which historically came from Spanish nobility whose very pale skins made their veins look blue. But reptilian law was always present, and even then, in those very early years, there were already talk about copper-based blood or non-human circulation. In part 2, we have just barely touched on how deep the lore of the reptilian-human hybrid goes. And in part 3, we will look at possible scientific and even biological explanations, which may even shock you. And if you think David Icke is a kook, you may not think so after part 3. Okay, guys and girls, until we meet again on the next one, please take good care of yourselves, stay vigilant, and stay safe. Bye.